Yeah, I know. So back in October, I photographed my own wedding. And this isn't something that I recommend anyone do, especially on such an important day. But it worked for me, and there's a lot of stuff I did in terms of planning and the gear that I used and some of the help that I brought in that could be applied to really any other shoot. So in this video, I'm going to take you through the how and the why of shooting my own wedding, and hopefully some of this stuff can be applied to other shoots that you have. So let's start with why I chose to photograph my own wedding. We were on a very short timeline for planning this entire thing. We got engaged at the end of August, and we wanted to get married in the fall, but didn't want to wait a whole year. So we planned everything in just over a month, and we got married on October 6th. On such short notice, we just couldn't find a photographer in a style that we liked that had any availability a month out. Most photographers are booked out months in advance or even a year for elopements and weddings. And another thing that kept crossing my mind as we were planning is that I didn't really want to go through the most important day of my life and not be able to document it myself. Photography has always been such a huge part of my life, and I just didn't want to miss out taking photos that I wanted to take on that day. So obviously, I couldn't shoot this whole thing completely alone, running around trying to set up a tripod. We just wouldn't be able to get the variety and the amount of photos that we wanted. So I did have to bring in some help. And that's where my friend Presley comes in. Presley has been taking photos for the past few months, mostly with a film camera. And then she's always asking me a lot of questions that I'm trying to help her answer, trying to help her improve. So I asked her if she would be willing to come along to the wedding, use all my camera gear, and photograph the wedding while I look over her shoulder and kind of guide her along the way. And yeah, I think it worked out pretty great. I'll get a little more into the gear later, but the gear was set up in a way that she could just focus on composition and shooting, and then I worked on editing all the photos afterwards. So once Presley was on board and we knew this is what we were going to do, I got into the planning phase of how I'm going to pull this whole thing off. As I started planning this wedding shoot, we had a few things to keep in mind. We wanted nice scenic mountain views, and we wanted to hike to get away from people, but we didn't want to hike too far that everyone would get all sweaty and tired before the ceremony and then have to hike all the way back out to get back to the car. So maybe half a mile to a mile and a half from the road in an area that wasn't too crowded, that had good views. We had two places in mind, up in Montana, which we're very familiar with, or Ouray, Colorado, which we've both been to a couple times and we love it there, but we don't get to visit all that often. We eventually settled on Colorado. There was a really cool hotel that had just been renovated, the Western, and we thought it'd be really cool if we could book a room in that hotel, and that would be where we stay for a couple nights, and it would be sort of like a mini vacation for me and Amanda, and then we would go elope out in the mountains outside of town. So once we settled on Ouray, I really got into what I call digital scouting. Lots of time on the computer looking at Google Maps, Street View on Google Maps. I look at All Trails and I look at Gaia GPS. And I was really just trying to find spots along the road that look scenic, and then I would look at trails in that area, look at trail reports, see kind of if there's snow already, if the trail's super steep, and just kind of get a sense of what that area is like before we even get out there. And that's something I've done for a lot of different shoots. I'll try and find locations through trail reports that people put out. And it takes a little bit of practice to translate someone's quick iPhone snap into what you can make it look like with a nice camera and lenses and smaller depth of field. But I've gotten pretty good at figuring out if an area looks good and if I can make it look better on camera. So that's what I did all around Ouray, looked for a bunch of different trails, a bunch of different options, and then tried to imagine photographing me and Amanda in these locations. Once I had a few spots narrowed down with one front runner, I just saved all that information for in-person scouting once we got out there. So after all that digital planning, we went out to Ouray a couple days early. We got our wedding license, our flowers, and we went out and did some in-person scouting for the areas that I had in mind. This valley behind me looked promising, but now we're kind of hiking down into it, and as you get deeper, you start to lose some of the grand views that we're looking for, so we're going to turn around, we're heading back up the hill, and then we're going to try and find sort of like a hilltop away from the trail that might be good.
This is the current favorite spot here. That's the background, and then Where's Nick? Okay, so Nick's here, and then I would be here with Nick. Got really good views.
All done scouting for the day. It's been a couple hours and we found a spot we really like over in there somewhere. And then we checked a few other spots that we liked, but I think the first one is the one we're going to go with. Did all that scouting, found the spot that we were actually going to get married. I dropped a pin in Gaia GPS, and then I dropped a few more pins for other areas we wanted to shoot at, so that on the day we weren't running around looking for new places to shoot, and everything was very smooth and efficient. And then the last part of planning was coming up with some mood boards and shot lists to show Presley what we were trying to capture and to remind me on the day, because my brain is preoccupied with getting married. I didn't want to try to be creative with all that other pressure on my brain. So everything was kind of planned out ahead of time. We had a good shot list, and it was easy to refer back to that and remind myself, oh yeah, we wanted to take photos of the rings or of our shoes. Having that stuff all planned out and written out was nice and easy to refer to. And I find that when I create shot lists, sometimes I'll reference them during a shoot. A lot of times when I'm in the flow, I don't want to stop that to go check my notebook. But even just thinking about those shots ahead of time and writing them out and creating these lists, kind of like when you're studying back in school, it just helps imprint that stuff in your brain. And I find that when I'm actually shooting for the day, those ideas just kind of pop up because I've thought about them and I've written them a couple different times. So that always helps planning out a big stressful shoot like this. So the gear that we used for this wedding. Initially, my plan was to have two cameras, my Sony a7 IV and Amanda's Sony a7 IV, one with a 50mm lens and one with a 70-200, and Presley would just have one of each on her shoulder and she could switch easily back and forth between the cameras. And then I also had my Fujifilm X100 VI with a fixed 35mm lens if we needed something a little wider, and just for candid, very natural looking photos throughout the day. Right before the wedding, I picked up this little Kodak camera, which is like a disposable camera, but you can reload rolls of film into it. I just use this for little nostalgic snapshots during the whole trip. Not everything went according to plan. The day before the wedding, someone stole one of my camera bags that had about $7,000 worth of gear in it, that had my Sony a7, my 24mm 1.4 lens, a bunch of mics, a bunch of accessories for my Fuji, some batteries, a flash. So that was a real bummer, and luckily not much of the stuff other than the camera was needed for the wedding. I basically just had to teach Presley how to swap lenses, and she just used one Sony camera with a 50 and a 70-200, and she would switch back and forth between those. And then I had the Fujifilm X100 VI with me most of the time, and then if I needed to be in a photo and you didn't want to see the camera, I'd take it off and give it to someone and they could just snap candids with that camera. So it ended up working out. I still haven't gotten any of that camera gear back. I did a whole video about that you can check out. But yeah, we didn't let it ruin the day. We still had a great day on the wedding, and it didn't really affect our plans too much, so we were lucky for that. Because Presley doesn't have a ton of experience, I didn't want her fumbling with camera settings and the stress of shooting a wedding all piled on. So I had the camera just set in aperture priority. I like shooting pretty wide apertures. I like a shallow depth of field, get some blur in the background. So on both lenses, we were just keeping pretty wide apertures, and the camera would pick the shutter speed, and then our white balance was just set to daylight. The Sony RAW files have so much latitude in editing that I really wasn't worried. As long as the exposure was pretty close, I knew that I could correct small mistakes in post. And then Presley could just really focus on expressions and composition and not have to worry about camera settings. So that's how the Sony was set up. And then my Fujifilm, I pretty much always keep it basically on auto mode all the time. That's just my little point and shoot camera. It's easy for anyone to pick it up, and you just press the shutter button and it takes good photos. And then one last little piece of gear that we had that was really just to get behind the scenes footage for this video. We just had the little DJI Pocket Osmo 3, which is a fun point and shoot video camera. Gets great stable footage. It has a gimbal built in. So we had that with us, and we would just give that to Hope, who officiated our wedding. and she would walk around and she got some behind the scenes stuff for us. So on the wedding day, there were really only a couple times where Presley was alone and I couldn't help her if something was going on with the cameras. In the morning when the girls were getting ready, she was alone in the room because I couldn't see Amanda yet. And then she also had to shoot the ceremony without any input from me. And then after the ceremony is when we really got into the photos that we were excited about. The light got better and better, and we planned everything pretty perfectly. So we had the ceremony, and then right after, the lights started to get really good, and then we pretty much shot until sunset, made it back to the truck, and we were home right around dark. And then we just got some takeout barbecue, and everyone met up in our hotel room, which was a really cool room, and it doubled as a little venue for us, and so that was pretty perfect. And Amanda made our cake. She made it back at home. We froze it, brought it in the Yeti cooler, and then she assembled it on the day while she was getting ready. And everything just worked out pretty perfect. So again, this isn't really something I would recommend, but for us, it worked out great. And there's not really anything we would change about how we planned it and what happened on our wedding day. So very happy. If you want to see more behind the scenes or how I think and how I work, check out the video that comes up next. This is my trip to Ecuador and how I shot and edited some of the portraits on this trip.